The words, sharp and sterile as a scalpel, sliced through the hushed reverence of the Chicago Memorial Hospital lobby. Security, get this kid out of here before he contaminates something. Dr. Alistair Harrison's voice, a hype instrument of disdain, echoed off the polished marble floors. He pointed a manicured finger, the nail buffed to a dull sheen, at the boy who stood dripping in the center of the vast, cathedral-like space. 10-year-old Jerome Williams froze, a small solitary figure in worn sneakers and a threadbare jacket. He had walked 12 city blocks through a relentless, freezing November rain, a pilgrimage of purpose. The cold had seeped into his bones, but it wasn't the chill that made his small hands tremble. It was the weight of a promise, a silent vow, made to a memory, a legacy he carried in the marrow of his being. He looked up, his gaze unwavering, and his voice, when it came, was a startling counterpoint to the doctor's shrill command, calm, measured, and imbued with an authority that defied his years. "Please, sir," Jerome said, the words resonating, with a quiet power that drew the attention of the nurses at the reception desk and the few visitors huddled in leather armchairs. "I just want to help the girl in the wheelchair. I know how to make her walk." Dr. Harrison, the esteemed head of pediatric neurology and the fourth generation of a medical dynasty that had its name etched into the very cornerstone of the hospital, stared at the boy as if he were a particularly resilient piece of grime. On his immaculate lab coat, contempt radiated from him in palpable waves. "Didn't you hear me? I called security. Street kids don't waltz in here and tell doctors how to do their jobs." At 45, Dr. Harrison had cultivated a career, built on two pillars: treating the children of Chicago's wealthiest families and telling their parents precisely what they wanted to hear. His specialty was managing expectations, particularly when the prognosis was bleak, and most especially when it concerned the daughter of the hospital's chief surgeon and largest benefactor, the powerful Dr. Michael Foster. Jerome stood his ground, his small frame a bastion of defiance against the approaching security guards, their heavy footsteps echoing his own racing heart. "The girl has been in physical therapy for 3 years and has never taken a single step," he continued, his voice clear and steady. "But I can help. My grandmother taught me." As if summoned by the sheer will of the moment, Dr. Michael Foster himself appeared at the end of the long corridor, pushing the custom-built wheelchair that held his 7-year-old daughter. Emma, the girl, a fragile bird with wide, intelligent eyes, had been born with a form of cerebral palsy that had baffled the best minds in the country. She observed the unfolding drama with a silent, unnerving curiosity. Then, her eyes met Jerome's. A current, unseen and inexplicable, passed between them. A slow smile, a rare and precious thing, spread across Emma's face. She lifted a small, frail arm, her fingers stretching towards the boy in the worn jacket. "Emma." "No," Dr. Foster whispered, his voice tight with a familiar mix of love and despair. He instinctively pulled the wheelchair back. "Let's go to your session." But Emma was insistent. She pointed a determined finger at Jerome, and then, a word, the first clear and intentional word she had spoken in 2 long years, fell into the stunned silence of the lobby. "Friend." The single syllable hung in the air, deafening. Dr. Harrison felt a hot spike of irritation. For 3 years he had orchestrated every aspect of Emma Foster's treatment. He had subjected her to a relentless battery of therapies, medications, and specialists. In all that time she had remained a beautiful, unresponsive doll, showing no interest, no spark, no connection to anyone or anything. And now, this street urchin had elicited a response in less than a minute. Jerome, sensing his moment, knelt, bringing himself to eye level with the small girl. His gaze was soft, his smile genuine. "Hi, princess. Do you want to learn how to dance?" "Enough." Dr. Harrison's voice cracked like a whip. "Security. Remove this boy immediately." He jabbed his finger at Jerome again, his face a mask of fury. "In you," he snarled. "If you show your face in this hospital again, I will have you arrested for trespassing." Jerome rose slowly, his dignity a shield against the doctor's venom. As the 2 guards flanked him, their hands gentle but firm on his small shoulders, he leaned in and whispered. His words meant only for Dr. Harrison, a secret arrow aimed at the heart of a hidden lie. "Doctor, I know exactly why Emma never got better, and I know you know, too." He didn't raise his voice, but the words struck with the force of a physical blow. Dr. Harrison's face, already flushed with anger, went stark white. He watched, frozen, as the guards escorted the boy towards the revolving glass doors. Jerome didn't struggle, he didn't look back, but the memory of his eyes, ancient and knowing, burned into the doctor's mind. There was a wisdom there, an unshakable resolve that had no place in the face of a 10-year-old boy. It was the quiet confidence of someone holding a key to a locked room filled with secrets too dangerous to be disturbed. The doors revolved, and he was gone, leaving behind a silence more profound and unsettling than the chaos that had preceded it. 3 days passed, a slow-motion eternity for Dr. Harrison. Jerome's parting words had become a malevolent echo in the pristine corridors of his mind. I know exactly why Emma never got better, and I know you know, too. The sentence replayed itself on a loop, each repetition chipping away at the carefully constructed facade of his professional life. He tried to dismiss it as the nonsensical rambling of a troubled child, a desperate bid for attention. But he couldn't shake the image of those eyes, the unnerving certainty that lay within their depths. It was a look he had seen before, in the eyes of senior colleagues who had caught him in a lie, in the eyes of his own father when he had expressed his disappointment. It was the look of someone who knew the truth. On Thursday morning, a cold, grey sky pressing down on the city, Dr. Harrison arrived at the hospital to find Jerome sitting on the wide marble steps of the main entrance. He wasn't trying to get in, he wasn't causing a scene. He was simply there, a silent, watchful sentinel, his gaze fixed on the endless stream of people passing through the glass doors. His presence was a quiet accusation, more potent than any shouted threat. "You called the police yet?" Harrison snapped at the security guard stationed at the front desk, his voice sharp with a frustration that was rapidly curdling into fear. The guard, a burly man named Frank who had worked at the hospital for 20 years, shrugged. "He's not causing any trouble, doctor, just sitting there. Technically, the sidewalk is public property. My hands are tied." The boy was goading him, a deliberate, calculated act of provocation, and it was working. Harrison's hands were clammy, his heart rate elevated. He felt a profound loss of control, a sensation he despised. Later that morning, during Emma's physical therapy session, the boy's influence made itself felt again. Emma, usually a passive participant in the stretching and manipulation of her limbs, was agitated. Her eyes kept darting towards the large window that overlooked the hospital entrance. When Harrison followed her gaze, his stomach clenched. Jerome was standing on the sidewalk, watching them through the glass. Emma began to fidget in her chair, a series of small, frustrated movements. She made a series of soft, guttural sounds, her brow furrowed in concentration. It was the most animated he had seen her in months, a desperate, non-verbal plea. "What's going on with her today?" Dr. Foster asked, his voice laced with a familiar note of weary hope. He, too, had noticed the change in his daughter's demeanor. "Just a phase," Harrison replied, his voice a little too loud, a little too dismissive. He strode to the window and yanked the curtains shut, plunging the room into a dim, artificial light. "Perhaps we should consider adjusting her medication. She seems But blocking the view did not calm Emma. On the contrary, her agitation escalated into soft, heartbroken sobs. They were tears of pure frustration, the kind Harrison hadn't witnessed in years. It was as if a dam had broken inside her, releasing a torrent of pent-up desire to communicate, to be understood. That afternoon, Harrison's day went from bad to worse. He was leaving the hospital when he saw Jerome in the parking lot, deep in conversation with Janet, one of the hospital's most senior and respected nurses. Janet was a fixture in the pediatric wing, a woman whose quiet competence and deep well of compassion made her a favorite among patients and staff alike. The sight of her listening intently to the boy sent a fresh wave of panic through him. "Janet," he called out, his voice sharp with authority. "You were instructed not to interact with this child." Janet, a woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and a nonsense demeanor, turned to face him. She was not easily intimidated. "I'm sorry, Dr. Harrison, but he was just telling me about some of the techniques his grandmother used with special needs children. It's fascinating, actually. Fascinating." Harrison's voice rose, bordering on a shout. "He's an uneducated child who lives on the street. What could he possibly know that we don't?" Jerome turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Doctor, my grandmother was Lily Williams. She worked in the pediatric neurology department at this very hospital for 30 years. Perhaps you remember her." The name struck Harrison with the force of a physical blow. His blood ran cold. Lily Williams, of course. He remembered her. She had been a legend, a nursing icon known for her almost mystical ability to connect with the most difficult cases. She had achieved extraordinary results with children that the doctors had written off as hopeless. She had retired about 15 years ago, and he had heard through the hospital grapevine that she had passed away recently. That's not possible," Harrison stammered, his mind reeling. She raised me after my parents died, Jerome continued, his voice maintaining that same unnerving calm. She taught me everything she knew, about how children's brains work, about how to connect with them when the adults have given up. She taught me especially about cases like Emma's. Janet looked from the boy to the doctor, sensing the seismic shift in the atmosphere. Dr. Harrison, if he really is Lily's grandson. Enough, Harrison exploded, his fear manifesting as rage. I don't care who he claims to be. Children do not treat patients in this hospital. That is final. Jerome took a step forward, and for the first time Harrison saw something other than calm in the boy's eyes. It was a flash of righteous fire, a glimpse of the formidable spirit that lay beneath the quiet exterior. The intensity of it made him take an involuntary step back. Dr. Harrison, I know you're lying to Dr. Foster about Emma's progress, the boy said, his voice dropping to a low, accusatory tone. I know you know exactly what's wrong with her, but you're hiding it. You're hiding it because you don't want to admit that you misdiagnosed her 3 years ago. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The sounds of the city, the distant wail of a siren, the hum of traffic, all faded into a dull roar. How could this boy possibly know? The misdiagnosis was a secret he had buried so deep, a ghost that haunted the darkest corners of his nights. He had been young, arrogant, desperate to impress the powerful Michael Foster with a quick, decisive diagnosis. By the time he had begun to suspect his error, to see the subtle signs that contradicted his initial assessment, it was too late. The narrative had been set. To correct it now would be to admit a catastrophic failure, to open himself up to a career-ending malpractice. Suit, you don't know anything, Harrison whispered, but the words were hollow, devoid of conviction. His voice trembled. I know Emma doesn't have severe cerebral palsy like you told her father. Jerome pressed on, his words like hammer blows against the fragile walls of Harrison's deception. I know she has a treatable condition, a condition that you missed, and now you're too afraid, too proud, to correct your mistake. A cold sweat trickled down Harrison's back. He felt a wave of nausea. How do you, he began, but Jerome cut him off. And I know how to help. My grandmother taught me exactly how to treat cases like this. But you'd rather let an innocent child suffer, trapped in her own body, than admit that you, the great Dr. Harrison, made a mistake. Janet stood frozen, her face a mask of shock and dawning comprehension. She had worked with Dr. Harrison. For years, she had always found him arrogant and dismissive, but she had never suspected him of this level of deceit. If you don't get out of here right now, I'll call the police, Harrison threatened, but the words were a hollow echo of his earlier command. The authority had been stripped from his voice, replaced by a raw, desperate fear. Jerome smiled, a sad, knowing smile that seemed to belong to an old man, a man who had seen too much of the world's pain. You can call them Dr. Rutlet. Be here, every day. I'll be here to remind you that there's a little girl in that hospital who could be running, and playing, and dancing, if only you had the courage to do the right thing. He turned and walked away, his small shoulders squared, his steps unhurried. He disappeared around the corner of the building, leaving Harrison standing in the middle of the parking lot, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. This boy wasn't just a nuisance. He was a walking, talking embodiment of Harrison's greatest failure, a secret that could destroy everything he had built. And he was just getting started. The boy's knowledge of Emma's case, Harrison was beginning to realize with a sickening dread, was just the tip of the iceberg, an iceberg that was slowly, inexorably rising from the icy waters of the truth, threatening to tear a hole in the hull of his life and send him sinking into the abyss. Dr. Harrison's resolve hardened into a brittle, desperate shell. This boy, this ghost of a legendary nurse, was a threat that had to be neutralized. The following morning he convened an emergency meeting of the entire pediatric neurology team. He stood at the head of the long, polished conference table, adjusting his glasses, projecting an air of authority he no longer felt. Colleagues, we have a delicate situation, he began, his voice a carefully modulated instrument of concern. An unaccompanied minor has been loitering on hospital grounds, disrupting our routine, and, most alarmingly, attempting to interfere with patient treatment. We need to present a united front and take decisive action. Dr. Rebecca Chen, a brilliant young neurologist recently recruited from a prestigious Boston hospital, looked up from her notes, her brow furrowed. What kind of interference, Alistair? Harrison waved a dismissive hand. The boy claims to possess some sort of esoteric medical knowledge, passed down from a grandmother who supposedly worked here years ago. It's clearly a case of childhood fantasy, a cry for attention, but it's causing a disturbance, particularly with the Foster case. Janet, the senior nurse who had been invited to the meeting as a courtesy, cleared her throat. The sound was a small, sharp crack in the tense silence. Dr. Harrison, with all due respect, I took the liberty of checking the hospital archives. Lily Williams did in fact work here for 30 years. She was one of our most decorated nurses. The records also show that she had a grandson, Jerome, who was recently orphaned. An awkward silence descended upon the room. Harrison felt a familiar bead of sweat trickle down his temple. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. That doesn't change the fundamental fact that a child, regardless of his lineage, cannot be allowed to— "Excuse me," Dr. Chen interrupted, her voice polite but firm. "May I ask what specific knowledge this boy has demonstrated?" Harrison was trapped. He couldn't reveal the true nature of Jerome's claims without exposing his own catastrophic secret. "Unscientific techniques," he stammered, grasping for words. "Baseless theories. Folk remedies. It's all highly inappropriate." "I'd like to speak with him," Dr. Chen said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "If he is truly Lily Williams' grandson, that changes the calculus of this situation. Lily was a legend. Her insights were unconventional, but often remarkably effective. I think we owe it to her memory, and to our patient, to at least hear the boy out." The meeting ended without a clear resolution, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Harrison's authority, once absolute, had been subtly undermined. That afternoon, Jerome was in his usual spot on the steps when Dr. Chen approached. She didn't loom over him as Harrison had. She sat down on the cold marble beside him, her expression open and curious. "You must be Jerome," she said, her voice warm. "I'm Dr. Chen. I've heard a great deal about your grandmother." Jerome studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense and discerning. "Did you work with her?" "Not directly," Dr. Chen admitted. "I'm new here, but everyone knows her reputation. They say she saved children, that the rest of the medical community had given up on." A flicker of a smile touched Jerome's lips. "She taught me that sometimes doctors get so caught up in their books and their theories that they forget to look at the child, the real child, right in front of them." Dr. Chen was struck by the profound maturity of his words. "Your grandmother was a very wise woman. Tell me, Jerome, tell me about Emma Foster." The boy looked her straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "Do you really want to know? Or are you just testing me, trying to see if I'll say something foolish so you can send me away?" The bluntness of the question took her by surprise. She found herself answering with a startling honesty. "I really want to know. Emma doesn't have severe cerebral palsy, not the way it's written in her chart." Jerome began, his voice low and confident. "She has a condition called neuromotor disconnection syndrome. It presents in similar ways, but it's different. It's treatable. It requires a specific kind of stimulation to rebuild the pathways between the brain and the muscles. My grandmother taught me how to recognize the signs, the subtle muscle flickers, the way her eyes track movement, the specific sounds she makes when she's trying to communicate." A chill ran down Dr. Chen's spine. Neuromotor disconnection syndrome was a relatively new and often misdiagnosed condition. If the boy was right, it meant that Emma Foster had spent 3 critical years of her development receiving completely inadequate treatment. "How can you be so sure?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because I saw the same symptoms in my cousin, before my grandmother helped her learn to walk," he said, "and because I've been watching Emma for weeks. Through that window, she responds to stimuli in ways that a child with severe classical cerebral palsy simply would not. The potential is there, it's just locked away." At that precise moment, Dr. Harrison emerged from the hospital, his face a thundercloud. He saw the two of them, sitting side by side, deep in conversation, and his expression hardened into a mask of pure fury. "Dr. Chen, what do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice echoing across the stone plaza. She stood, her small frame radiating a quiet strength. "I'm talking to a very perceptive young man, Alistair." She turned to Jerome. "Jerome, I would like you to come with me, I think. It's time you met with Dr. Forster. I think he needs to hear what you have to say about his daughter." Harrison's world tilted. If this boy, this oracle in sneakers spoke to Michael Foster about the misdiagnosis, about the hidden truth, his career wouldn't just be over. It would be annihilated. "This is absolutely unacceptable," he sputtered, his voice cracking. "Dr. Chen, you are subverting hospital protocol. You are allowing a street kid to question a certified medical diagnosis. I am allowing a child who demonstrates an extraordinary and specific medical insight, inherited from one of the most gifted, practitioners this hospital has ever known, to share his observations, she countered, her voice like ice. It's called a second opinion, Alistair. Or have you been at the top so long you've forgotten what that is? Jerome rose slowly, his eyes darting between the two doctors. He saw the panic in Harrison's eyes, the defensive posture, the subtle tremor in his hands. It was all the confirmation he needed. Dr. Harrison, he said, his voice laced with that same unnerving calm. You're afraid, aren't you? You're afraid of what I'm going to tell Dr. Foster. I am not afraid of anything a child has to say, Harrison retorted, but the words were hollow. Then let me show him, Jerome challenged. Let me show him what I know about Emma, if I'm wrong. If it's all just a fantasy, then you can have me removed from this property for good. You'll never have to see me again. Dr. Chen looked from the boy to her superior, sensing that this was more than a professional disagreement. This was a reckoning. Alistair, what is the problem? If the boy is wrong, it will only serve to validate our established methods. There's no harm in it. Harrison was cornered, a rat in a trap of his own making. To refuse now would be to admit he had something to hide, but to agree. To agree was to walk willingly to his own execution. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. All right, he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Fine, but when this charade is exposed for what it is, I want disciplinary action taken. A slow, sad smile touched Jerome's lips. Perfect. Dr. Harrison, I think you're going to be very surprised by what we discover. As they walked back towards the hospital entrance, Dr. Chen leaned down and whispered to Jerome. Are you sure you know what you're doing, son? My grandmother always said that the truth is like a river, Jerome replied, his voice soft, but sure. You can dam it up for a while, but eventually, the pressure builds and it finds a way through. And the longer you try to hold it back, the more destructive it is when it finally breaks free. What Dr. Harrison didn't know, what no one knew, was that Jerome had done more than just watch Emma through a window. He had spent the last 2 weeks talking to the older nurses, the ones who remembered his grandmother, the ones who had seen her work her quiet miracles. He had discreetly read through publicly available research on neuromotor disorders. He had filled a tattered notebook, the one tucked away in his worn backpack, with meticulous, dated observations, noting every flicker of response, every subtle sign of progress that Harrison had dismissed as an involuntary spasm. Those handwritten pages contained more than just a boy's theory. They contained the evidence, the proof, the key that would unlock not only Emma's potential, but the dark, hidden secret of Dr. Harrison's career. As they stepped into the elevator, Jerome felt the weight of the notebook in his backpack. His grandmother had taught him that justice required patience, but she had also taught him that when the moment came, you had to be ready. The storm was about to break, and Dr. Harrison, in his arrogance, had just handed Jerome the lightning rod. When they entered the spacious physical therapy room, Jerome discreetly pulled the tattered notebook from his backpack. The air was thick with tension. Dr. Foster stood by his daughter's wheelchair, his face a mask of weary hope and confusion. Emma, however, lit up the moment she saw Jerome. A genuine radiant smile transformed her face. Dr. Foster, Jerome began, his voice respectful but firm. He approached the wheelchair, his movements slow and deliberate. May I show you something about your daughter? Dr. Foster, a man accustomed to being in command, found himself nodding. There was something in this boy's demeanor, a quiet confidence that was impossible to dismiss. Of course, but be quick. Jerome knelt, bringing himself to Emma's level. He didn't use any of the complex equipment that littered the room. He simply began a series of gentle, precise exercises, touching specific points on her legs and feet, speaking to her in a low, encouraging murmur. To the astonishment of everyone in the room, Emma responded. Her toes wiggled. She made a conscious effort to bend her knee. They were small movements, but they were undeniably voluntary. That's impossible, Dr. Harrison muttered, a sheen of sweat breaking out on his forehead. Emma has severe cerebral palsy. Those are just involuntary spasms. Jerome turned to face him, his young face set in a look of profound seriousness. Dr. Harrison, Emma does not have severe cerebral palsy. She has neuromotor disconnection syndrome. It's a completely different condition, and it's treatable. Dr. Chen moved closer, her eyes wide with fascination as she watched Emma's reactions. Jerome, how can you be so sure? The boy opened his notebook, its pages filled with a neat, precise script. November 1st, he read aloud. Emma responded to deep tactile stimulation on her lower extremities, a response inconsistent with severe upper motor neuron damage. November 5th, she demonstrated conscious control of her facial muscles when I made a funny face at her through the window. November 10th, she attempted to vocalize specific sounds in response to my voice. Dr. Foster's face went pale. You've been observing my daughter. Without my permission. From the public sidewalk, sir, Jerome replied, his gaze unwavering. And what I saw were clear and consistent signs that her diagnosis, that one she has lived with for 3 years, has been wrong from the very beginning. The world seemed to stop. Dr. Harrison felt the floor drop out from beneath him. That's absurd. A 10-year-old child, questioning a certified medical diagnosis based on sidewalk observations. Jerome stood and looked directly at the man who had tried to humiliate him, to discard him like trash. Dr. Harrison, do you want me to tell Dr. Foster about the MRI scans from 2020, the ones that were misinterpreted? Or should we talk about the results of the neurological conductivity tests that contradicted your initial diagnosis, the results that were never fully shared with him? The silence in the room was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Dr. Foster turned slowly, his eyes, the eyes of a brilliant surgeon, now narrowed with a terrifying, dawning suspicion. Harrison, what is he talking about? Harrison was shaking now, his composure completely shattered. Michael, don't listen to him. He's a child, he's making it up. My grandmother was a meticulous record keeper, Jerome continued, his voice relentless, a steady drumbeat of truth. She kept copies of all the important tests for the cases she was interested in. She was working on the pediatric floor when Emma's initial results came in. She showed them to me. She taught me how to see the things that you chose to ignore. He flipped a page in his notebook. MRI report, March 15, 2020. Conclusion. Fundamentally normal brain structures, signs consistent with mild to moderate neuromotor disconnection syndrome. Prognosis, favorable with appropriate and immediate stimulation. Dr. Foster snatched the notebook from the boy's hands. His own hands, the hands of a surgeon, trembled as he scanned the meticulous notes, the dated observations, the quoted reports. His face, already pale, turned ashen. He looked at the man he had trusted with his daughter's life. Harrison, is this true? Cornered, exposed, with nowhere left to run, Dr. Harrison's carefully constructed world imploded. Michael, at the time, there was some uncertainty in the diagnosis. Uncertainty. Dr. Foster's voice was a low, dangerous roar. Uncertainty. You told me my daughter would never walk. You told me to accept that she would be dependent on others for the rest of her life. You told me to give up hope. I was being cautious. Cautious. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her voice sharp with professional outrage. She took the notebook from Dr. Foster and examined the notes. Jerome, these observations are extraordinarily accurate. You've documented neurological response patterns that clearly indicate preserved motor function. This isn't caution, Alistair. This is negligence. This is malpractice. Jerome ignored the imploding careers around him. He knelt by Emma's chair once more. Princess, he whispered, do you want to try to stand? He spoke to her, his voice a low, encouraging murmur. He guided her, his small hands supporting her. And then, for the first time in her life, Emma Foster pushed herself up. She stood, wobbly but upright, supporting her own weight on her own 2 legs for a few miraculous seconds. It wasn't walking, it wasn't running. But it was a beginning. It was everything. Tears streamed down Dr. Foster's face. He looked at his daughter, truly seeing her potential for the first time in 3 long, wasted years. He turned to Harrison, his grief transmuting into a cold, hard fury. 3 years, Harrison. 3 years of my daughter's life. Stolen. For what? For your pride. For your fear of admitting you made a mistake. Jerome calmly closed his notebook. Dr. Foster, with the right treatment, Emma can live a normal life. She can walk, and run, and play, just like any other child. Dr. Chen, her own eyes misty, looked at the boy with a profound sense of awe. Jerome, will you help me? Will you help me develop a proper treatment plan for Emma? It would be an honor. Dr. Harrison, a broken man, made one last pathetic attempt to salvage some shred of his shattered authority. You can't take a child who lives on the streets seriously. Where are his credentials? His medical training? Jerome turned to him one last time, his eyes filled not with triumph but with a deep, sorrowful pity. Dr. Harrison, my grandmother always said that true knowledge doesn't come from a diploma on the wall. It comes from a genuine love for the patient. It comes from the heart, something you clearly forgot a long, long time ago. Dr. Foster holding his daughter in his lap. watching as she responded to Jerome's gentle touch, delivered the final, devastating verdict. Harrison, you're fired. And you can be sure that the medical board will be hearing exactly what happened here today. As Harrison staggered from the room, his career in ruins, a new reality began to dawn in the halls of Chicago Memorial. It was a reality where the truth, spoken by the most unlikely of messengers, had the power to shatter lies, to heal wounds, and to set miracles in motion. And as Jerome Williams patiently began the long, slow process of teaching Emma Foster how to dance, no one yet knew that he held one last secret, a legacy from his grandmother that would not only change Emma's life, but the future of every child who walked, or was wheeled, through the doors of that hospital in search of hope.